As children, we are inherently wired to avoid the dark. I never went outside after sundown when I was a kid, not even my own backyard. And hell, I even found myself still fleeing to my parents' bedroom for the night until I was a teen, terrified of the imaginary beasts and boogeymen that hid beneath my bed, in my closet, or any number of places imaginary monsters are known to hide. But now I know where the real monsters hide, and they are anything but imaginary. As much as I hate to admit it, I am a drunk. Not only a drunk, but a depressed drunk. After finally turning 21 a few months ago, I no longer had to ask older friends to buy alcohol for me. And now, without any inhibitions, I found myself hitting the bottle at least once a night. Some days I just had a couple beers before bed, and some days I woke up sprawled on the kitchen floor of my apartment with a dish towel draped over me that I had apparently used as a blanket the night before. By all metrics, I have a pretty amazing life, living by myself in a not too shabby apartment, working from home and doing what I love, with no boss or supervisor to speak of. Yet there I was, more miserable than I had ever been in my entire life. I saw my entire existence as worthless, thinking myself to be a pathetic leech on this world, not really caring if I lived or died. I stopped being afraid of the dark long ago, when the last of my instincts for self-preservation were pushed to the wayside. A vestigial instinct, back before I thought that death was the only escape from this hollow existence. But I don't think that anymore. Working from home was less of a blessing than a curse, as after nearly 6 months of isolation, I found my body growing both flabbier and scrawnier at the same time, a consequence of my hyper-sedentary lifestyle, and my social skills quickly atrophied to become nearly non-existent. I would wake up at odd hours of the night, unable to find any hint of drowsiness in me, and this led to my odd, somewhat unhealthy obsession with night walking. I would often find myself getting out of bed at 2 or 3 in the morning to simply walk around my city, located on the fringes of the Dallas area. Not quite in the wild Texan countryside that you might be thinking of, but far enough out that walking to the nearest gas station was an hour-long excursion, which is exactly what I would do on nights like tonight. I found myself nearly exploring my entire town in the months following my move to this place, as it was the only thing that took my mind off of drinking, and the only thing that distracted me from my sad and lonely reality back at the apartment. A strange hobby, I know, but every minute I was in that apartment was suffocating, as I feared that I would be stuck in this vicious cycle for the rest of my life. I had no fear of what lied in the dark, as realistically I knew the most unpleasant thing to happen to me on my late-night forays was being approached by law enforcement, skeptical of the reasoning I provided for while I was walking along the interstate just before the crack of dawn. I just wanted to explore something other than the rank, alcohol-soaked mess that awaited me back at home, and all the painful and bitter memories I had stored there. But even this respite proved restricted eventually. For the past 2 weeks, it had rained incessantly, the kind of rain that feels like a bucket being poured over your head at all times, and the outside world suddenly became just as cold and gloomy as the inside. After what felt like a lifetime, there appeared to be some refuge from this downpour, allowing me to finally resume my nightly activities. But after thoroughly exploring the entire city within a 5-mile radius of my apartment, I found the walks through the same old paths to be all too familiar, being a very extension of the home I was trying to escape from. And what good would that be? I wanted something more nostalgic, something that reminded me of a more simple time. Having grown up in the area, I settled on a large secluded park that was just a bit farther out from my normal walking distance. And with there still being large amounts of flooding on some of the sidewalks from the torrential shower we had just received, This was one of the first and only times I actually saddled up and settled on using my car. There's a little creek there that snaked around in the forest that I would visit with some friends when we were teenagers, and perhaps a quick visit there would bring back some happy memories. Around 1:30 a.m., I put on some cargo shorts and a jacket, having not checked the forecast or even sticking my head outside my door to gauge the temperature, and I was shocked to be greeted by a chilly embrace. Although I contemplated going back inside and changing into jeans and a heavy coat, I ultimately decided against it, and went ahead and jogged in my car, almost slipping several times on the smooth, wet ground. I believe this decision inadvertently saved my life. As I arrived at the park with not a single house or car in sight, I steeled myself for the cold and headed towards the woods, with every puff of my breath forming into a fine mist before my eyes. Despite a full moon hovering above me on this particular night, upon entrance of the forest, I was met with almost complete and utter darkness, with a thick canopy of leaves blocking out the overwhelming majority of any of the moon's illuminating, yet strangely eerie, light. It had been years since I had visited this particular park, but I could still somewhat recall the layout and how to get to the creek my buddies and I used to have barbecues at, drink beers at, and even occasionally have a dip in. I strongly considered pulling out my phone's flashlight to guide the way, yet thought back to all the stories I had heard as a kid of strange things lurking in the woods, and by some crazy logic, I thought having a light might attract the unwanted gaze of whatever was joining me in the forest on this most unpleasant of nights. And besides, I didn't want to get the attention of anyone who might be tempted to call the cops on me for my strange prowling obsession. After a brisk 5-minute walk through the woods, I quickly discovered the trail that led down to the creek I had visited so many times as a boy, now being revisited by myself as a man. Only instead of feeling nostalgia, I felt mostly unease, knowing I was in a place that not I, nor any person on the planet belong at this time of night. As I walked, I heard the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves all around me. Noises quite typical of forests such as this late at night. And although a little spooked, I continued on. For some perspective, I remember the creek as dipping about 20 to 30 feet below the main trail that led to it, and normally was around 10 to 15 feet wide. But upon approaching this depression, I was shocked to find the creek easily double the width it normally was, with the water line lying a couple yards above where I recalled it to be. Although I quickly surmised that the intense and ceaseless rain we had received for the past couple weeks had clearly had a temporary impact on this body of water. In stark contrast to the dense woodland I had just foraged through, the creek was an entirely different world, with the full moon casting enough light for me to see the stream's meandering path cut through 100 feet of the forest. As I shimmied my way down the side of the rocky riverbank, I began to reminisce over some good times I had made here with my old friends when we were younger and more reckless. And as if lit by a dim fluorescent bulb distant in the sky, I spotted a medium-sized rock just poking out from the surface of the flowing water, glimmering in the moonlight. It was strange, as I never remembered a boulder large enough to peek up above the surface of the water, especially when the surface was elevated so high, such as on a night like this. But as I contemplated this anomaly, I felt my fingers instinctively tense up as I began to slowly, and then quickly, slide down the rocky bank, right on my ass. And that's when I heard the last thing you want to hear next to a body of water in the middle of the night. A kasploosh and splash of water materialized right in front of me, as ripples danced across the water's surface. The rock had disappeared. and that's when I panicked. I turned around from facing the stream and out of anguish dug my fingernails into the 60-degree slope that stretched back to the path. Right before I found myself sliding in the exact opposite direction of where I wanted to go. You ever hear of the Ice Bucket Challenge? Well, it was a bit like that. Only your entire body feels it, and it doesn't end. At first, I thought I had died from shock, but that was right before I regained my senses, and I thought I was dying from the cold. After falling a good 5 feet into the ice-cold water, having my entire body, including my head, plunge into the stream, the feeling of foul water rushed into my mouth and up my nasal cavity. My biggest concern had still not yet come to fruition. My biggest concern was the rock I was staring at. It wasn't a rock. It was a head. A head, and presumably, the body attached to it, which was now submerged beneath the surface of this inky abyss, with me. I can't describe what came next. It was like a dream where every part of your body is exponentially weaker, weighed down by some unseen force. My joints had almost instantly locked up from the cold, or the fear, and my arms refused to cooperate, almost as if I was being pulled down deeper into that murky chasm. Every single second I was out there, I honestly and truly expected to die. I expected to feel something brush past my leg right before I felt the sharp pain of teeth piercing my skin as I was dragged back into the void. I expected the hood of my jacket to snag on a ghastly webbed hand belonging to some ungodly creature of the night. I expected a million different gruesome endings for the sad and pathetic life that I lived. But the last thing I expected was to escape. As I desperately clambered up the side of the impossibly steep riverbank, I cursed every god out there for making this cruel planet. I cursed everyone who had led me to this predicament. I cursed myself for my stupidity and foolhardiness. And that's when I realized that I desperately wanted to live. In one last-ditch effort, I thrust myself up with all my remaining strength, my face grimacing in pain and finally pushing my atrophied muscles to the limit. It felt like a Charlie horse, a sharp and indescribably painful contraction of muscle, only on every limb. My body's punishment for my long-time misuse of my extremities. That's when my hand finally struck something solid. Slick and wet and practically slipping out of grasp, but indeed, it was solid. One of the roots or branches, I'm not sure which, of a nearby bush had snaked down just close enough that I could firmly grab hold, and with the strength of a man possessed, I hoisted myself up what felt like merely an inch, but this gave me just the right amount of leverage for my knee to slightly grasp the edge of the rock, and I lunged out of the water and onto the bank. My right shoe, waterlogged and weighed down by a combination of mud and creek water, slipped off my foot, but thankfully, my shoeless foot ended up being less of a hindrance than imagined, as I was actually able to dig my toes into the soft mud in order to climb further up the bank, something that would have been impossible with shoes on. Feeling more like a fish out of water than a man on land, I re-entered the forest, soaking wet and slightly disoriented, and darkness engulfed me once again. For the life of me, I was unable to remember which direction of the path led back to salvation, and which one deeper into this godless hellscape. But I settled on the left. I wanted light, needed light now, right at that very second. I pulled my phone from my damp pocket, but as you can imagine, the device was less than cooperative, failing to even turn on, and I stumbled through the night as I coughed and spat and gibbered and cursed, heaving and sobbing all the while. My arms were outstretched, flailing desperately in front of me, hands trying their hardest to do what eyes could not. The darkness was completely enveloping, with only the faint outline of branches in my periphery to guide the way. I wasn't even sure if I was on the path or whether I was heading back to that nightmare I had just escaped from. The entire time I ran through the woods, I swear I heard rustling coming from only a few yards behind me, although it was nearly impossible to tell for sure with the sound of my keys jangling from my belt and my own heart beating in my ears, which literally felt as if it were going to burst. I sprinted for what appeared to be an eternity, as cliché as that sounds, but in reality it was perhaps only 15 minutes, tripping over my own feet and cutting myself on every single stray branch before I finally saw the blue Honda Civic that I knew as my own. I believe that I was initially headed in the wrong direction, but after a while got turned around, and somehow, by some miracle, found my way back to the parking lot. My hands, coated in dirt and what I was only just realizing was blood, gripped the steering wheel for dear life, as my heart still pounded like an Olympic athlete's. I made my way home, with the external pains of my body now matching that of the inside. Once I got to my apartment, I sluggishly stripped off my soaking, muddy clothes and saw the true extent of my injuries. The skin on my fingertips was nearly rubbed raw, with the dirt packed deep underneath my fingernails, no doubt from the multiple fruitless attempts to find some grip along the bank, and my knees were streaked blood down my shins, with it being impossible to tell the actual degree of the scrapes due to the large amount of mud still caked on my legs. So I turned the shower as hot as I could stand and lay there on the floor of my bathtub for almost 45 minutes, simply washing away the absolute terror that was trapped inside me. I swear it took just as long to stop the shivering. As I was about to turn off the water and exit the lavatory, I felt a sharp, stinging pain on my right ankle, and I glanced down, noticing 3 red parallel marks streaking down my foot, just above where my shoe was. It was only then I realized that my shoe hadn't fallen off my foot. It had been pulled off, and had I been wearing jeans on this night, I have no doubt that whatever was out there, lurking in the water, would have easily grabbed hold and yanked me down, never to be seen or heard from again. I don't think I'll be drinking again. Not for a good long while at least. And I think I'll be sleeping with the lights on from here on out. And if you're reading this, please listen. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know where it came from. But I know what it wanted. And I know what could have happened to me. There are things on this planet that we fear. Ancient things that have long been forgotten. They've been on this planet long before we were here, and will carry on long after we are gone. The hikers, backpackers, and campers of the world who disappear without a trace. I know what happened to them. Some of them, at least. Don't take your life for granted. And most importantly, don't go out in the woods when it's dark. Ever. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.